the strange alliance, the alliance of necessity, the uneasy alliance. These adjectives qualified the wartime partnership between the United States and Great Britain on the one hand, and the Soviet Union on the other. During almost 4 years, the threat posed by Germany necessitated an alliance based upon sheer pragmatism between long-time adversaries. Only dire need motivated these nations to temporarily set aside their historic antipathies toward each other. Since the establishment of the Soviet Union in 1917, its relations with the United States and Great Britain were strained at best. American and British leaders feared that socialism might well spread abroad in the wake of the Russian Revolution, and they were enraged by the unilateral peace Lenin concluded with Germany, allowing Russia to withdraw from the First World War, thus permitting the Kaiser's troops being redeployed from the Eastern to the Western Front. And during the Russian Civil War, the Western Expeditionary Force sent to help the White Armies in their attempt to overthrow the Soviet regime tainted relations with the new state from the very beginning. In 1933, when the United States officially reinstated relations with the USSR, it was for economic reasons only. And in 1939, the Western powers were altogether surprised by the non-aggression pact between Hitler and Stalin, and outraged by the dismemberment of Poland. Yet by the end of 1941, Britain, the USA and the USSR were all at war against Germany, and felt forced by circumstances to work together as best they could against the common foe. To many eyes, this alliance seemed unnatural, and few could imagine how such different, even opposite regimes could speak in common voice and actually work together. And indeed, that common dialogue was not easily found between the Western powers and the USSR. In terms of military strategy, they agreed upon one major point only: to concentrate on the European theatre of operations against Germany and Italy, even if it delayed the effort to deal with Japanese aggression in the Pacific. The Soviet Union was not at war with Japan. Its sole concern was saving the motherland from the German invasion. While the Japanese attacks on both American and British possessions in December 1941 made it politically impossible to ignore the Pacific, Churchill and Roosevelt agreed with Stalin to focus their attention primarily on Germany. On all other matters, there was disagreement over military strategy and how post-war security for all three powers was to be attained. For the Soviet Union, which was fighting for its very existence against almost all of the German war machine, an immediate invasion of occupied France by the United States and Great Britain was clearly the most appropriate strategy. Only an all-out invasion of Western Europe, opening up a second front, would force Hitler to redeploy significant German troop numbers from the Eastern Front. Stalin argued that less forceful and more indirect operations in other areas would not provide the Soviets the relief they required. For the British, an immediate direct frontal assault on the well-fortified wall of Hitler's fortress Europe was military suicide. The two Western powers were inadequately prepared to launch such an immediate assault. They had neither the manpower nor the armament needed to give it sufficient chances of success. Years of preparation would be required. Instead, Churchill argued that the Western powers should concentrate their military efforts on the periphery of Fortress Europe, in the areas where the Germans and Italians were their weakest. This periphery strategy called for joint British-American operations against Germany's Afrika Korps in North Africa, followed by sequential invasions of both Sicily and Italy. Only then could the D-Day Second Front invasion of France begin. Roosevelt did his best to find a compromise between these two forceful leaders, and he succeeded in convincing both Churchill and Stalin that the Western powers would pursue the periphery strategy while undertaking preparations for D-Day. As soon as those efforts were complete, Britain and the United States would invade occupied France. Nevertheless, the delay of the Second Front created intense suspicion and tension between the Soviet Union and her Western allies. The Soviet leadership, based upon their historical antipathy with the West, feared that the United States and Britain were intentionally delaying the attack in hopes that the Soviets and the Germans would destroy each other. The two nations would launch the invasions then, and only then, in order to establish Anglo-American hegemony and control over all of Europe, including the Soviet Union. Let us look into this strange but also fascinating alliance, plunge deeper into complex diplomatic relations, and review the most interesting letters exchanged between the great leaders. We'll see that suspicion, fear, and even anger between each of them shows up under the official tone, sometimes remotely and sometimes incredibly near, almost right behind the official diplomatic language. To analyse these peculiar relations in their strange and international context, we'll rely on the magnificent work by British war correspondent Alexander Worth. In Worth's book Russia at War, he provides a first-hand account of how the Western Allies were perceived by the Soviet people.